Greetings and salutations, Afrolytes. It is I, Afromandius, back with another video today. Um, excuse me, I just wanted to say, everything's been going good so far, especially with school coming back into the swing of things. And, after taking that couple of days off, kind of allowed myself to, kind of experiment a little bit and allowed me to think of a new video that isn't creating a champions. I know, we're back on the train now, so do what you got to do and throw your pitchforks and throw your tomatoes. But, it's, again, it's a work in progress. And again, just hold on, trust the process, and allow Afro to serenade you with my sultry voice. And, so just get relaxed, get comfortable and allow me to talk to you about today's champion. And, I had mentioned his sister in my videos a couple of videos back, and with the Empress of the Jury Ray. So today we're going to be talking about General Jin-Ito of the Jury Rays. So, who is Jin-Ito? What is he? Let's, kind of reel it back a bit, because, there's no point in really trying to go over what he is, because I've already kind of explained it, not only in the Legend video, but also Himawari. He's basically a Jury Ray. What is a Jury Ray? Go back to my other videos and I basically explain what a Jury Ray is. A Jury Ray is basically just a giant space cat person. That is basically all you need to know about him is, TLDR, he's just a giant space cat samurai person, right? So, where did he come from? Where, what was his origins? Well, let's, instead of going back to where, he is, let's go back to where his parents were, right? So I had mentioned this in my Himawari video, but just as her past is crucial with her parents, so is Jin-Ito's. So as I explained back in Himawari's video, it's basically explained that there was a incident that happened on their planet, that basically there was red crimson thunderstorms that happened in the sky, right? And basically there was just a big battle that was fought between two beings that fell from the sky. And, as they crash landed onto the planet, Jin's father, Raijin, I know, really creative naming scheme there, Dad, but basically he found these two bodies and he gathered all of his scientists and all of his alchemists to take it back with him. Why, you may ask? Well, that's because his wife, Karin, was sick. And it wasn't just a regular illness. No, this illness was detrimental. So it could either take the life of her or her unborn baby, or maybe both. They weren't sure. But she, unfortunately, was very much bedridden and very ill. So, as Raijin got, his forces together and made a medicine for her, that medicine, unfortunately, was made from the bones of a star. So basically, as I explained in my Himawari video, they grinded up the star, like, shard pieces, I guess you could say, the bones of the star, and they basically made it into a tiny medicine for her to take. And while she was able to recover, she unfortunately got sick again, and that was with, Himawari, right? So when she was in the process of giving birth to Jin, she realized the power that this thing held, and she had sealed it inside of sealed it inside of Jin. The reason that she did this is because with the Jury Rays, their children are born to be the next generation up, so they tend to be a lot more powerful than their parents, right? So she realized this, and that her body was not as strong as it used to be, so she sealed it inside of Raijin because his body was a lot more capable and was able to hold on to such power. This is going to come back later on into the story, especially with Raijin. Not Raijin. See, this is what happens when you have the same name as your son. You literally just take Rai out. But anywho, that's basically what happens with the birth of Jin, is that not only is his mother very much weak, but now he is sealed with one of the most dangerous kind of creatures in all of Afro universe. I just came up with that trademark. But yeah, so that's how he was born. And as I mentioned in my Himawari video, when she was born, unfortunately, her Jin and Himawari's mother, unfortunately, wasn't strong enough to make it through, and she had died in the process of childbirth, along with sealing the other star inside of Himawari. So, of course, with Jin being the older sibling, he basically, not to say that he has resentment over over his sister, but he does feel some kind of way because, in a way, it's like, with the life of my mother, it costed, for you to be born. And, not to say that like he resented her or anything, but it was very much like, I really got to keep an eye on you. I don't want anything happening to you. We've already lost mom. I can't lose you, right? So Jin as a whole is very much a very honorable young man. He, say it with me now. He grew up in a nice royal family, so he was given the best training, the best weaponry, the best like food, yada yada yada. Privilege, right? He grew up very privileged, but in a sense, he was very much a young, noble, honorable man. He was taught by the Jury Ray honor code that they do not kill, but they only incapacitate. Now, I know what you guys are thinking is like, Afro, they're space cat samurai people. They have swords. Why don't they kill? And it's a matter of just the process of it. They don't take a life because they see life as very honorable, and they don't, the only way that they, take a life is if it's a last precautionary action. And again, I had mentioned this in my Himawari video, basically stating that the Jury Ray's culture is very much similar to how the Yautjas are, is that they don't fight anything unless they are either provoked or they see a worthy match, right? So, in a way, I like to say that Jin-Ito is like a mixture between Batman and a Yautja, like from the Predator franchise, right? So they both have an honor code, but that honor code says you do not kill unless absolutely necessary. So, how did he grow up? What was it like? So, in a way, when his childhood, when he was growing up, obviously with his father, losing his wife because of the fact that he, made the medicines and whatnot, he didn't know what the problem was with, the ceiling and whatnot. He didn't know exactly what that was, and he wanted all of his, alchemists and whatnot and the scientists to kind of keep an eye on his kids because they just had this tattoo that was on their like chest area. It wasn't really a big tattoo, but it was very much noticeable. And he thought it was, the illness that killed his wife. So he was very much, standoffish, towards his kids. Not to say that he didn't love them, but it was very much, I hate myself because of the fact that I let your mother die and I can barely look at myself in the mirror. So just kind of do what you got to do. I'll be here if you need me, right? So he was very distant away from his kids, but he very much did care about them, especially when it came to Jun. He very much saw a lot of him, he saw a lot of himself inside of Jin, very much how he grew up and how, honorable he was. So in a weird sense, he just saw himself and he didn't really like himself because of the fact of how much, trouble and just danger that happened to his own kids. So, he taught, obviously, with him being the general of the empire of the Jury Rays, he taught his son how to, fight and taught his son like martial combat and whatnot. And that's, I basically explained all of this, mostly all of this inside of Himawari's video. So again, it's not really like a crucial thing to know about, but just know that, he was next in line to rule the Jury Rays, at least like in a sense of being the general, because actually in Jury Ray culture, it's very much a matriarchal society. It's very much run by a lady, so it's the Empress. The Empress is held at such a high regard. And if it's siblings, the Empress and the youngest son is promoted to the general of the Jury Rays, and one of the Jury Rays, from the armies, not the general himself, but like if they are strong enough to contend with the actual general themselves, then they are promoted to be like married to the Empress and they become emperor. But the emperor doesn't really have that much power as compared to the Empress. Think of like chess, right? The queen has a lot more power and has a lot more movement as compared to the king. So, I'm going to explain that when I talk about the actual Jury Rays themselves. Like I may do that in a separate video, basically going over their biology, but as I explained in Himawari's video, the, cat-like, things about them is that they have cat-like senses, so they have extra senses. They have, super agility and whatnot. They have a tail that they use in combat. They use it to grapple their enemies, like wrap around their arms or wrap around their weapons if it's knocked out of their hands, right? So, that's basically what their biology is. And obviously, say it with me now, everything was going good just fine until the Great War. Yay! Great War. I'm so happy. This is honestly probably the 20th time I've talked about the Great War, but guess what? It's a very crucial part of the story arc, and especially with all these characters that are in these separate universes, it is such a turning point for all these characters that we're going to be focusing on. It's just, you cannot not just talk about it or avoid it and get it out of the way, right? So, what was the Great War? Obviously, it was the war between the Xerxians and the Jury Rays, and of course with their allies on the Xerxian side, there was the Jurians. On the Jury Rays, there was the Elementals. So, you guys must be wondering, okay, you explained, Afro, you had to explain in the last video the reason why the Xerxians chose the Jury Rays, because they were good at destroying things, right? So what was the reason that the Jury Rays chose the Elementals? And for that, I say resources. The Elementals are, get this, elements, right? So with them, they can allow them to have access to different types of materials, and they, with them being the actual element themselves, they can separate like different parts of themselves, and they can create weaponry and create different types of things. So with the elementals themselves, they are basically nigh indestructible, but they do have this thing called a soul gem. I'm going to explain that in my next video when I talk about Kova Dragoon, because he also plays a role in the Great War. Not as much, but he very much does, like, he's very much there, right? And he basically has trauma upon trauma. I mean, what character in my story doesn't have trauma? Trauma builds character, blah, blah, blah. But basically, they have this soul gem that resides inside of their body. So, I'm going to make this short because obviously this isn't a video about the elementals, but basically the elementals are just pure, they're pure elements, but they do form into solid masses with organs and stuff like that, right? So one of the most important ones is the soul gem, and the soul gem obviously resides in their body. If that is destroyed, then they are destroyed, right? So basically that's all you need to know so far. I'll explain this in my Kova Dragoon video when I get to them, which will probably be next week, so get ready for that. But that's kind of the reason why the the Jury Rays went to the elementals, is because they can provide them with the resources that they need for the war. And it was a lot more beneficial for them because it saved them like a lot of stuff, because they can get the earth elementals to like do farming and stuff like that and allow them to create food and whatnot, get the fire elementals and the rock and the steel elementals to become like blacksmiths for them, right? To create weapons, but I say this as they don't have, I say this like they don't have their own weapons. They do. It's just that for them, they tend to be a little more traditional when it comes to that sort of thing, but they do have advancements, right? Again, as I mentioned before, they're very much similar to the Yautjas, and the Yautjas tend to have more like traditional weaponry, like their razor wrist gauntlets and their spears and their nets and stuff like that. So again, kind of like how this, how the Jury Rays are, they have traditional weaponry, but they also have like plasma guns and plasma crossbows, and they also have ships that they fly. So, that's kind of what their, society is like. They're very much traditional, but they still have advancements to the point to where, they can still like kick butt and whatnot, right? So, speaking of which, like what is like a general consensus of a Jury Ray? Basically, they're tall space samurai cat people, but as one is part of the army, they do have a tattoo that resides around their forearm, and it's basically, you probably already seen it with Himawari in the jack post, but basically it's a couple of circles that kind of circle around their arm. Kind of looks like a chain, and it ends in like a strap right down there. When they activate their like weapons and whatnot, their arm tattoo glows and it summons their weapon. Now these weapons can like form into anything that they do choose specifically. So obviously when you think about it, it's swords, spears, bidons, tridents, and sometimes it could even form into like crossbows depending on what rank you are, or not rank, but what's the word? Basically, like what if you're more of like a groundsman, like a ground sentryman, like you will mostly likely have a sword or a spear. But if you're more of an archer, then it'll be like more of a bow or more of a crossbow. Whatever you're like, whatever you reside in the army as your rank or your position is what your weapon will be. So that's what Jin-Ito is, but his weapon is actually different because he, obviously with a star sealed inside of him, his body is actually fused with that star, and that weapon that's created from him is a lot more powerful. So, it's a lot more powerful as compared to the regular like sentrymen that run on the ground or fly through the skies. Also, another thing is that they do fly as well. I'm going to explain that in Jin-Ito's like powers and abilities, but just keep in mind that, with him having the star inside of him, he is a lot more powerful as compared to his other compatriots. With that power, he tends to lose control of it, and he very much, as I mentioned before, he is very much honorable, and he is noble, but he is very quick to anger and can get very frustrated very easily. So, that's obviously with the self-hatred that he feels towards himself, but also at the loss of his mother and the distancing from his father. So it almost seemed like he never really had like any parents that could really help him focus on that sort of thing. So, with that, he does have a good friend named Kiryu. Kiryu is basically one of Jin-Ito's closest allies, and was one of the runner-ups to marry was one of the runner-ups to marry Himawari, but Kiryu doesn't necessarily want that. Instead, he just wants to have a good fight with his general. Kiryu is a very interesting character because all he really wants to do is just fight Jin-Ito, and wants to prove that he can be the general of the army. He doesn't, not to say that he doesn't like care about Himawari, but it's like, I already got some other things going on with me and my family and whatnot, but I just want to fight you to prove that I'm better than my own general. So, Kiryu actually comes back later in a very tragic sort of way. It's very upsetting, but if you've seen my posts of him, then if you know, right? So, he has him to kind of come to and allow him to kind of like vent out his frustrations, and with Kiryu being close friends with him, he considers him like a brother and whatnot, right? So later on, as I mentioned, the Great War happens. Obviously, Cinderella Man comes in and just wrecks house. It's hell. It's dangerous. People are dying left and right. Society's collapsing. Oh, woe is me. But, just as he recognized the power that's coming from Andreas, he also recognizes power that comes from Himawari and Jin-Ito. So, obviously, as I mentioned before, when he summons his sword, that's what attracts and kind of catches his eye, because he realizes, like, compared to the other, like, Jury Rays that he fought, none of them had the same aura, the same, like, power that exhumed from them as compared to what happened to Jin-Ito. So it's very interesting because, in a weird sense, in a technical sense, yes, Jin-Ito is a star. So, just as he says, I'm going to save you, Andreas, I'm also going to save you and figure out what's going on with you to, Jin-Ito and Himawari. So, obviously, you guys know the story. He basically surrenders, but then he's thrown in prison. This kind of gives everyone some downtime to kind of like catch their breaths and whatnot, and, kind of figure out what the heck he is and what's going on, right? So this is the perfect time for Andreas and, Jin-Ito to kind of like figure out what's, happening and why, he wanted to stop because of them. So this is kind of a perfect bonding moment between these two, because this allows, as I mentioned in my previous videos, David and Andreas kind of went their separate ways. David went to the Xerxians and the Jerian side, while Andreas went with the Elementals and the Jeri Rays. So this kind of allows him not only to learn the culture, but also kind of learn how they fight, how how they go about things, and what basically how everything is going on. Then they were him and Andreas and David were going to meet back up and kind of figure out like what the heck's going on, because they were basically arbiters of the Great War. It was kind of a suicide mission, but it was like, okay, as long as we got rid of those two metahumans, we're good. That's what Earth said. That's not words that came from me. It came from Earth. Very, very racist towards metahumans, as I explained. But yeah, so this kind of allows Andreas and Jin-Ito to kind of like express their gratitudes and respects for one another, especially when it comes down to their fighting styles and whatnot. Because, as I mentioned before, Andreas, he's no slouch. He knows how to fight, and this kind of intrigues Jin-Ito. So he kind of allows him to be part of his army and whatnot. But this is kind of a problem because, Andreas doesn't really want to fight in any war. He wants to try to figure out how to stop it. So he's willing to go along with it and try to form the position and whatnot, but he wants to try to get intel and try to figure out how to mitigate and stop the war, right? So at this point, as I mentioned in my previous videos, Jack and Himawari kind of hit it off. They kind of realized their love for each other, and they're spending a lot more time with one another. This kind of makes Jin-Ito very upset, because obviously they're political enemies and they shouldn't even be looking in the same direction as Xerxians. Not to say that he's kind of racist towards Xerxians, but it's more or less like, the only reason that I hate you is because the war said so. Again, kind of similar to how Alva is when she was growing up, or at least when the Great War started, is that they are our enemies now. They, we don't see eye to eye, literally, to them anymore. So, he tries to talk to Himawari and tries to get her, back to her senses and realize that she needs to be Empress. But as I mentioned back in Himawari's video, I know don't do a drinking challenge, because your liver will basically hate you. But basically, as I explained back in Himawari's video, she doesn't really want to be a political figure because she thinks that's boring, right? And basically her grandfather, their grandfather, right, from Karin's side, taught her how to fight, taught her how to defend herself and whatnot. And when he realizes this and sees the tattoos on her arm, again, I mentioned that the tattoos are only for, people who are inside the war, or like warrior class and whatnot, he gets very upset with his sister. They have a big argument, and, siblings and whatnot, right? Don't even get me started. But siblings have disagreements and they get into a big fight and whatnot. But, that fighting has to come to a stop because Cinderella Man escapes. Oh, goody. So, again, as I mentioned back in Alva's video, the word gets out that it was actually King Adam who, by proxy, created the Cinderella Man, and he was exiled. This gets to Cinderella Man. He loses his marbles and escapes from the prison that he was held in, basically. And as I mentioned in the last videos, it is a lot worse as compared to his first encounter with all these people, right? A lot more death, a lot more destruction, and unfortunately, I'm losing Osiris. Oh my god, I was about to say Jack like 3 times, but Osiris loses his mother in the altercation, and this kind of sets the foundation to allow them to work together. Again, not necessarily. Again, I'm still kind of working out the iron and the kinks of it, but this kind of like while he experiences the same pain that Osiris felt, he realizes that there is more to them than what meets the eye, because they're Cyclopses. Anywho, so basically, this kind of shows that even throughout everything that's happening, they're still individuals, they're still people, and that this war is completely pointless because, what do you get out of it? You get prisoners or you get dead bodies. Again, say it with me now, war doesn't determine who's right, it determines who's left. So, obviously with everything that's being said, Jin-Ito kind of loses his, not necessarily loses all of it, but he realizes that, Jack or Cyrus is hurting, and so he sees his sister comforting Jack. So in a weird sense, he finds some sort of kinship between himself and Osiris. Also with Anubis, but Anubis is kind of a hoo-ha when it comes to a sort of thing. Again, I'm going to have a video focusing on him sometime soon, but basically, with them losing their mother, they kind of experience it in different ways. Anubis becomes a lot more angry and a lot more vitriolic, while Osiris kind of just he just shuts down. He doesn't even want to talk, and he doesn't even want to just fight anymore. But with the help of Alva and Himawari and David and Andreas and Jin kind of, getting together and realizing that they got to stop Cinderella Man. They realize that they do have an advantage because, Cinderella Man does see something in at least 3 of these characters. So they at least have a chance to probably fight and go against him, right? So, they kind of lick their wounds and kind of gather as much resources as they can because there's not a lot left of it. All the armies have been decimated. Most of the people kind of either evacuated or died. So they kind of just grab their stuff and kind of zoom off to where Cinderella Man is, or where Cinderella Man is going to find King Adam. You guys know the rest. All bets are off. There's a big chase scene. Cinderella Man throws planets at people, and then he makes it to the planet that King Adam's on. That planet is, basically in ruins and is basically dying. You guys know the rest. All the more important characters or the younger generation is flown off into space. Jack and Rose, or Osiris and Himawari go fly off to Earth. David and Alva go flying off into Battle Nexus. And then Jun actually goes to another place that isn't Battle Nexus or Earth, but he does go to an Earth, but it's not the same Earth as Earth. I know you guys are following me, but it's like, I'll explain it basically, as I mentioned in my last videos, the Earth that is ours, or the Earth that resides in this universe, is not our Earth, right? So the meteor that killed the dinosaurs was actually much bigger and a lot more dangerous because, as I mentioned before, when the meteor came crashing down, it actually split this Earth in half, and the other half went around the sun. And over time, obviously, it regrew and became, 2 separate Earths, right? So while Jack and Rose, Himawari and Osiris went to one Earth, Jin-Ito actually went to another Earth. And so obviously, as I mentioned before, Earth 1, we'll call this one Earth Uno, and we'll call this one Earth 1, right? So Earth Uno is the chronicle universe, quote unquote, story, while the legend, is Earth 1, or the legend universe, quote unquote. So he goes there, and unfortunately he is a fish out of water in this situation. Again, I'm still kind of writing some things out, but this is kind of leading up to the Jin-Ito, the Alien Blade saga. So, in this story, he meets a conspiracy theorist, I guess. I don't know what you would call it, reporter. Her name is Shannon Briggs. Shannon Briggs is basically kind of his guide to Earth and kind of allows him to kind of be more stationed in Foundation and whatnot. Then he meets a couple other characters along the way, that being Hoagie and Dr. Samuel Greenday, which honestly is one of my favorite villainous characters, and I can't wait to explain his ordeal and whatnot. But they go on different types of adventures and whatnot, and as I mentioned, Kiryu comes back into the story, and not in a good way. So basically, as I mentioned before, Kiryu is becomes a proxy star of the Gashadokuro. And, I mentioned this in my legend video, so I'm not really going to go in depth here, but basically he was ordered by Jin-Ito to gather as many people as they can to evacuate on another rock somewhere out of, away from the war. So that way the jury rays could at least have some sort of semblance of survival. rations run low, unfortunately, and this causes people to fight amongst each other. Kiryu has to unfortunately make the big sacrifice to end the lives of the rest of the jury rays that are left. And unfortunately, he's still the only one left, but he can't bring himself to do it because he feels so much guilt. So he is hungry though. So he resorts to cannibalism, and this is what attracts the Gashadokuro. Excuse me. The Gashadokuro basically guilts him and makes him feel so much worse. And before he tries to take his own life, the Gashadokuro actually summons all of the souls that were slain by Kiryu and forms it into solid rock, and he shoves it into Kiryu's chest as a permanent reminder of his actions. But at this point, he does become a proxy star of the Gashadokuro because the Gashadokuro convinces him that it was because of Jin-Ito leaving them behind because he was still alive, right? At this point, of course, Jin-Ito assumed that everyone was just kind of dead. So, unfortunately, circumstances happen. He comes back, and it's a very sad reunion, unfortunately, but it's very good. Can't wait to write that out. Obviously, when it comes to this sort of thing, the relationship, especially between Jin-Ito and Dr. Samuel Greenday, is actually really interesting and really important because when it comes to their relationships, they find nostalgia within one another. When Dr. Greenday was younger, he used to watch a lot of like anime and manga and whatnot, right? So one of that anime was, obviously I'm not going to say it because, copyrights and whatnot, but we'll just say that it involved a lot of flying monkeys and they were yelling their power attacks before they blasted out, right? So obviously he watched that when he was a kid and he wanted to be exactly like that. So, when he got to meet another more powerful alien, again, I'm not going to talk too much about Dr. Samuel Greenday, but this is kind of TLDR. When he meets someone a lot more powerful, he's excited because he wants to prove that humanity will always be on top, right? But when it comes to Jin-Ito, Dr. Samuel Greenday actually reminds him so much of Kiryu because of how dedicated and just how much determination is in his heart to prove that he's better than his, compatriot, right? So their relationship is very interesting because it does go from like hero to villain, he's like his arch nemesis to rivals and whatnot, right? Of course, Jin-Ito is the hero of the story while he's the villain, but they're very much a rival dynamic. But that's kind of what I have for Jin-Ito so far. Obviously, there's a couple other villains that he meets. There's one called Mobzilla, who, get this, is a mob boss who turns into a giant, laser firing creature. Obviously, I'm kind of writing that out. But he also meets the Hoss, which is a giant Russian guy who has the ability to absorb different types of attacks and is able to expel them out in different ways. So, I'm still writing them out and I'm still writing how they're going to be intertwined in his story and Jin-Ito's story. But that's kind of what I have for him so far. What are his powers? What are his abilities? So, say it with me now. Similar to how, as I mentioned in Himawari's video, he is very much, he's a jury ray. So he has very much, say it with me, super strength, super speed. Again, kind of moderate intelligence. He's not like building machines or anything, but he's still very smart. Very high in battle IQ because he is the general of the jury rays. I think I already said super agility and whatnot because he is like a cat, right? So he's very much flexible. He does flips and tricks and stuff. But as I forgot to actually mention in my Himawari video, the Himawari and Jin-Ito actually use and this is kind of similar to how it is in Naruto, but they use different types of hand signals to use elements in their fight, right? So, obviously, as I mentioned with the elementals, they kind of help improve that kind of power that resides in the jury rays. So they use rock, earth, fire, lightning, different types of nature types, water. So they also use that in their combat. And as I mentioned before, they're really good at stealth. With them being samurais, they're also technically ninjas too. So in a weird sense, they are very much like how I would describe um, Jin-Ito is that he's a mixture between a Yautja, like a prime Yautja, Batman, and like a Naruto. They're very much similar in that sort of sense. So with them, he can also fly. He can also like teleport. He has the ability to throw like laser kunai that either explodes on impact or he can control the explosion and whatnot. So he has that to his weaponry, and as I mentioned before, he has his sword, which is known as the Dragon Slayer. The Dragon Slayer basically, is probably the strongest sword in all of like my fiction and whatnot, one of the strongest weapons because it's basically nigh indestructible and can slice through pretty much anything that it comes into contact with. It was even able to slice Cinderella Man. That's what kind of caught Cinderella Man off guard, is because all the other Jury Rays weren't even able to their weapons would break on impact, but his was able to go through them and slice right through them. So, and that's kind of where he is. He's also, as I, explained with him being trained and whatnot, he's very high in combat skill, not only with his sword, but also different types of weaponry and hand-to-hand combat. Um, excuse me, again, frog in the throat. I apologize. But that's kind of where he is, with his abilities and whatnot. And as I mentioned before, he uses his tail as a weapon as well. So what is his character, morally? Again, as I mentioned before, he is very much a humble, noble young man, but he does get prone. He is easy to anger and easy to frustrate, and some of his enemies do use that against him, especially with Cinderella Man and whatnot. So he is a good person, but he has a lot of self-hatred and self-doubt that resides inside of him, quite both figuratively and literally, because he has a star living inside of him. So he literally fights inner demons each and every day that, they try to get out and like take over his body, right? So, what does this character mean to me? This character means, as I mentioned before, a lot of my characters mean a lot to me, especially when it comes to Jin-Ito, because his story is so much more different as compared to the other stories that kind of happen with these other characters, because he, as compared to especially with Jack or Osiris and Himawari, he's put at a disadvantage, right? And he's basically all by himself. He doesn't really have someone by his side when he lands on this earth. So at this point, he's kind of all alone. He's basically to himself. That is until he meets Shannon. And, through Shannon, he was able to learn how to, be calm and be more at ease and learn to love the earth and its people. That, and also he meets one of his greatest allies, and that being a half Jorian, half human. I'm going to explain that when I talk about him. That being Hoagie. Hoagie is an experiment from Dr. Samuel Greenday from Green Corps, and he is used as a weapon to try to take down Jin-Ito, but they realize that they come to an understanding, and Jin-Ito actually frees Hoagie, and Hoagie, they kind of work on again, off again to try to like stop crime and whatnot, but Shannon, through the help of Shannon and her love to protect Hoagie, they kind of work together as like this like terrific trio, I guess you can say. So they fight against Dr. Samuel Greenday and all of his experiments and, Green Corps and whatnot. So, he is really important to me because it basically has the message of a lot of fighting inner demons. And obviously with a lot of people, and especially me growing up, I, had to fight a lot of like, not evils, but more or less I have a lot of like pent up rage, especially when I was younger, and I had no reason to have such anger that resided in me, but I just so happened to have it. And, I've tried very much, and I've been going to a lot more counseling to kind of, expel that from my body. And I've grown and I've matured, but I will say that when I was younger, I was a lot easier to prone to anger, and I, honest to God, can't fathom the reason why. But with all that being said, it very much is a story about trying to find one's identity, through a new world, and trying to redeem himself after all that he's lost. And obviously, when it comes to a lot of my characters, redemption is probably the main theme in trying to find a new identity. And, with him with him being the general or former general of the Jury Rays, he very much is heartbroken and saddened when he's basically lost everything. But he realizes that through coming to Earth, he realizes that he has to become Earth's protector now. And he's not alone. He realizes that he's also not alone because Shannon is there for him, and so is Hoagie. But there's also a underground society, underground organization. It's not the Undercover United, but it's known as Black Flight. Black Flight is run by a man named Jason Chi, and he is actually one of the characters I've had a long time ago that I'm bringing back, and his name is the Crow. Not the terrible, reboot The Crow, but basically, he's basically a crow man, I guess you can say. He can transform into a crow. So Black Flight is basically the underground fighting force that fights against the evil regime that resides on this earth and whatnot. So they recruit the Rising Renegades, and they also recruit Red Tatanka's team. So with that, he also gets recruited to fight amongst them. And he, with the Rising Renegades taking out Yami, obviously there's a lot more evil forces that want to try to get on top and become the apex of the world, right? So that's basically where his story is now. Later on, obviously, he does become the new Admiral of Earth and whatnot, and kind of similar to how Jack becomes the president of Earth, and him and Shannon kind of realize their love for each other and get together, all smoochy smoochy, kith kith, right? So, but with all that being said, I'm really happy with how this character is being written out. And again, I'm not going to go as long as in depth as, I have with these other videos, because I kind of basically explained this in my last videos and just kind of explained what these characters are. So, with all that being said, I'm really happy with how these videos are turning out. And again, kind of expect to see these every Wednesday or so, every other Wednesday. But with all that being said, I do love Jin-Ito because just how different he is, his story is wise compared to all the other characters that I have. And I truly, truly can't wait to see how he develops, and especially with his relationships and, friendships and whatnot. So with all that being said, I'm really happy with how everything's turning out, and I'm really glad to how I'm still able to put videos out. I have enough time for myself and also for schoolwork and for family and for other relationships and friendships and whatnot, right? So with all that being said, I'm so glad that you guys are able to stop by and watch some of these videos. It means a whole lot to me. I know you guys are still kind of hesitant about commenting, but leave a little comment. I would like to see what you guys think. But with all that being said, I have been Afromandius. Thank you all so much for watching. Stay fresh and stay frosty, Afrolytes, and I'll catch y'all next time.